Thank you. Thank you all for joining the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Services 2026 Legislative Update. Glad to see you all here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Erica Evans, the Executive Director of the department, with the official title of Department Commissioner. Some of you may have interacted with me. I previously served as Deputy Director in 2023 and 2024, and at that time I was over our licensing and compliance and legal functions. Today, I have also with us some of our compliance team. I'll just briefly introduce them. I think many of you have interacted with them over the years. We have Craig War, our compliance administrator, Aaron Hinkle, our violations program manager, Christy Talon, our event permit specialist, and Jorge Corona Leva, our on-premise program manager. They're going to help me out throughout today, make sure that I get everything right and correct me when I'm wrong, and are also here if you have questions after. A couple housekeeping items. We do have the chat function available if you have questions throughout. I don't know that we'll have time to answer every single one as we're going through the presentation. If we don't have time to do that, I'll go ahead and we'll send some follow-up information to respond to those questions so that you do get an answer. And then with that, I think we'll kind of kick it off. The first thing I want to say is I acknowledge that particularly with ID checks and ID verification, there's been a lot of change. In 2025, there was a bill that changed a lot of things for you. And then in 2026, some of that is being rolled back. I think that maybe feels a little bit like whiplash. I think some of our compliance team would feel similarly if I can speak for them. And today our goal really is to guide you through that and hope to give you as clear and accurate information as we can. So with that, you can see on the screen a slide about legislative process. So I wanted to start us off with just a little background about the legislative process. Some of you may know this well, some of you may not. So if you do know, it's a little bit of a refresher. So the general session is when the legislature passes bills, and it happens annually, 45 days from mid-January to early March. Happens at the same time every year. And that is the only time during the year that the legislature can pass changes unless they call themselves into a special session. The department, just as a reminder, through that process interacts with lawmakers and policymakers, but we aren't able to lobby or advocate for the policy changes. We do provide data and information when asked. And at times, some of that is related to what we've heard from you folks, from other licensees, from those that are impacted by the laws themselves. Sometimes it relates to how it would impact our own operations, just to educate. Bills or legislation generally go through the same process, all of them. So they have to pass both the House and the Senate, and they have to go through a committee hearing and through the floor vote in both houses. And then one thing that's a little bit unique to alcohol is there's generally one, what we call omnibus alcohol bill each general session. And that omnibus bill, you can see a picture up on the screen of the front page of this last year's omnibus bill. It covers kind of anything that touches alcohol, usually. And so that's usually where the bulk of the changes will be found. Sometimes there are other bills that will impact alcohol, either peripherally or directly. This year we had 3 bills in particular that impacted both the department and also some of you. And that is House Bill 59, House Bill 597, which is that omnibus bill, you can see it on the screen, and then SB 275. If any of you are interested in following along with the legislative process, the website for the legislature is actually really useful. It's le.utah.gov. You can find any past bills. You can read the bills that passed this last 2026 general session. You can follow along with committee hearings, participate in those if you would like to. And it's a good resource to kind of see what's going on up on the Hill. So, as I said, the number one question we've had is related to ID verification. And we've had some outreach to all of you. Today is really to hopefully be clear, as I said, about where we're at in this point in time. This year, the legislature rolled back some of a 2025 requirement for all establishments to visually check IDs 100% of the time, what we've been calling 100% ID check. The visual ID check requirement is part of what we call the interdicted persons law, which prohibits the sale of alcohol to certain individuals based on court order, usually stemming from a DUI conviction. As part of that legislation, the Utah Driver's License Division, which is a separate department from us, was tasked with creating a driver's license that notes no alcohol sale or that someone is interdicted. You can see a picture up on the screen of what that looks like, just as a visual for all of you, and we also have that available on our website. Now, the 100% visual check requirement applies to state stores, package agencies, off-premise beer retailers, bars, and taverns. So a little bit of a pivot there. In addition, there were some other changes related to, oh, and Melissa, let's go back to the other slide. I'm not quite here yet. You're getting a preview. In addition, with bars and taverns, the 2025 legislation also changed the previous requirement that bars and taverns must electronically scan the ID of a patron who appears 35 years of age or younger before they enter the premises. This year, that remained in place. So that means bars and taverns must still electronically scan the ID of a patron before entrance, regardless of age appearance. So how that looks is a visual check of the picture and then a scan. The prohibition on serving a known interdicted person still applies to all establishments who are serving alcohol. This includes state stores, it includes package agencies, it includes event permittees, and all types of licensees. But I want you all to remember it's a known interdicted person. So that means the person or the establishment serving alcohol is only expected to prohibit the sale or consumption of alcohol on premise for customers who they know are interdicted. And if you remember on the previous slide, there's that no alcohol sale that would give you that knowledge. One of the most common questions that we have received as a result of the law change is whether passports remain a valid form of ID for alcohol purchase. And the answer has always been and continues to be that yes, they are. We also understand, and we've communicated to lawmakers, that passports, and for that matter, out-of-state IDs, will not note whether someone is interdicted, and that could be considered a loophole. So we're aware of that. Doesn't mean you can't take passports. So you can see up on the screen. Oh, let's go back one, Melissa. Sorry, I think you got a little ahead of me. There we go. So what changed? We just kind of went over what largely stayed the same. Restaurants, they now are only required to visually check and electronically scan the ID of a patron who looks 35 years or younger. That's kind of harkening back to the last the changes that predate 2025. The one distinction here is that applies in both the dining area and the dispensing area. So for reference, the dining area is where patrons usually are most common consuming food, and the dispensing area is the counter or area where drinks are dispensed. This change doesn't change any other requirements, including the prohibition that minors have to be seated in a dispensing area, or that they cannot be seated in the dispensing area. As we discussed on the previous slide, the legislature chose not to make this change for bars and taverns, despite conversations about that previous 35 years of age or younger about formerly applying to bars and taverns. But the distinction is now between restaurants and bars and taverns. I know this group is largely on-premise folks and licensees, what we call retail licensees, but I want to also mention that there were some changes to ID verification for off-premise beer retailers. So your convenience stores, your grocery stores that sell 5% beer, they also must electronically scan IDs for curbside or drive-through window alcohol sales. And then other licensed establishments or permittees don't have any other specific requirements related to visually checking or electronically scanning IDs. As we kind of noted, you're still prohibited, and those licensees that aren't encompassed in some of the changes we've talked about are still prohibited from serving minors or an interdicted person. And it's really a business decision on how often they want to check the IDs to prevent that. And then one exception to that as well, event permittees, we generally require that you do have some verification of ID set up. I think many of you probably also apply for event permits, and we can walk you through that process. Christy in particular should be available to talk through that. Last thing, all this information is on our website. We have what we think is a handy dandy chart that shows the license type and the requirements for ID or electronic scanning requirements. And then, of course, your compliance specialists are here to kind of walk you through those changes too. I think there's been some issue with the chat, but I think it's working now. So hopefully it is if you're looking to do that. Okay, so let's move on to electronic scanning. Additionally, this is kind of probably the second most common question we've had after the last 2 years. And the ID checks, the electronic scanners, as a result of the changes this year, the electronic scanners that you used prior to 2025 still are acceptable. And those are largely those with a magnetic stripe card reader or 2D stack symbology. In addition, mobile IDs continue to be acceptable. They always have been. You just must have the right equipment technology to accept those. And then information obtained from an electronic scanner, regardless of the type, still must be kept for 7 days and then deleted. So that also has not changed. In the wake of the changes in 2025, we also received a lot of questions about what licensees are required to do if an ID does not scan. And that could be either if your system's down or for like a passport that doesn't scan. The rule, the law that remains the same on that. If an ID scanner is unable to read the ID, then you must document in some form the type, the number, the expiration date, the name, and the birth date of the patron. We have received some feedback about how this practically works. We recently took our commission and some of our team members on the road down to Panguitch, where we held our monthly commission meeting where they issue licenses. And we were able to meet with a local business owner who explained, particularly in a high tourist area for him, where they see a lot of passports, they see a lot of out-of-state IDs, foreign IDs, which we will get to. It's difficult for his staff to read if it's in a different language. So I think this is an area that we would really be welcoming of additional feedback about how to go about this, and we acknowledge that it can pose some difficulties. Okay, acceptable forms of ID. So now that we've kind of made it through the ID verification requirements, the electronic scanning requirements, well, I also want to touch on the pivot that the legislature made as far as acceptable forms of ID. So foreign driver's licenses that include a photo and date of birth are now acceptable forms of ID. I want to make clear that this doesn't include other forms of foreign identification. It's only a driver's license. Again, I want to say we understand that passports, foreign IDs, non-Utah state IDs won't have that interdicted person note, but they are still acceptable for alcohol when you are providing alcohol to a patron. In addition to, the legislature spent a fair amount of time discussing the future of electronic IDs, digital identity, some of the privacy concerns associated with that. And the result of those discussions, which I think will probably be ongoing for future sessions as well, but had one impact on those of you that choose to accept mobile IDs. And specifically, that is that you must post signage noting the type of what they call identity attributes that are collected and retained. And that means the name, age, birth date, and gender, if you remember what you're supposed to collect on the previous slide. The signage must include what those identity attributes are, so name, age, birth date, and gender, how they're used, which in this case is to verify age or the ability to sell alcohol to someone, the purpose for which they're processed, same reason, and how long they're kept. And that for you all is 7 days, as we discussed. Okay, fake ID confiscation. Another policy choice that the legislature made, bars, restaurants, taverns, and off-premise beer retailers may confiscate suspected fake physical IDs. So that doesn't include your mobile ID on your phone. This is not a requirement. It's a business decision, not required by law. You won't get a violation if you choose not to confiscate, but it is an option for you to consider. If you choose to do so and an ID is confiscated, law enforcement must be immediately contacted. And if law enforcement can't respond within 30 minutes, then the ID must be returned to the individual. Okay. For several years, the legislature has engaged in discussions surrounding what we like to call proximity. Proximity refers to the distance that certain establishments that sell alcohol may be from a community location, which includes a school, a park, a playground, a church, or a library. Those establishments include on-premise licensees, so retail licensees, all of you folks, package agencies, and then also state liquor stores. The proximity requirements, the feedback has been that they're largely inflexible and very challenging for businesses that open near a community location. The legislature has now provided some wiggle room here, allowing local governments to weigh in on whether a restaurant or a hotel can serve alcohol if they are close to a park, playground, or library. Specifically, restaurants and hotels may be awarded a license even if they do not meet proximity requirements, if they obtain local consent after a public hearing. That public hearing must be 30 days before that local consent is issued. Procedurally, what that means for you, if you are one of those establishments, is DABS will require 2 local consents. One, to operate the establishment, the same local consent that was required of all of you before you were licensed, that has always been required. And then 2, a local consent to operate near that park, playground, or library. We have a form on our website for both of those if you choose to use it. The new version of that local consent that relates to proximity, it requires that you provide the date and time of that meeting, that public meeting, and provide a link to the minutes or a copy of the minutes. It's not required that you use those forms. They're there to guide you so you know what we're looking for. And if you have questions, again, happy to answer them. One important note on this, the change does not apply to those restaurants and hotels that do not meet proximity to a church or a school. And it also does not apply to bars, taverns, or any other license types or state stores. Okay, portability. So over the last several years, the legislature has also engaged in conversations related to a guest's ability to carry an alcoholic beverage throughout certain areas of the hotel or resort to the guest room. This has otherwise been called portability. Several years ago, the legislature passed legislation allowing an alcoholic beverage to be carried through a designated route, which is called a designated conveyance area. This year, the legislation provides that for hotel licensees only, so not resort licensees, that designated conveyance area must be the most direct route possible. What is considered the most direct route possible is really based on the hotel's floor plan. And our DABS compliance specialists are happy to walk through what that would be if you have questions. Many times we think that this will be probably just the most ordinary route of travel, but it is contingent on reviewing the floor plan because all of them vary to some degree. In addition, in the same vein of portability, the legislation also allowed a patron to carry alcohol from a bar to a restaurant owned by the same person, with a couple caveats. If those locations must be less than 35 feet apart. They can't have to pass through a public walkway, and an employee must escort the patron to the restaurant. Okay. A few other operational changes that relate to your business operations. First, locked liquor storage is no longer required for retail licensees or on-premise licensees during non-business hours. This has been a question we've had for years. So what constitutes locked? Should displays be locked? A bunch of questions that stem from that requirement, all of which are really no longer an issue with that prohibition being taken out. In addition, retail licensees are not required to serve canned cocktails or RTDs sealed. In the last few years, the legislature allowed the sale of canned cocktails in an original container that meets certain requirements by those retail licensees who are authorized to serve liquor. You can find the list of all those that have been approved for sale on our website. It's our ready to drink site, and we can share that with you. There's been quite a bit of confusion over why they need to be sealed when there's some different language in law that says that beers are supposed to be open. And so now, when it comes to RTDs, that decision is a business decision. Sealed or open is acceptable. One exception that I want to point out there too, RTDs or canned cocktails still must be in the original container. And the only exception to that is in the designated conveyance area for a hotel or resort licensee. They do not have to be in the original container. They have to be in a container that's approved for the use in that designated conveyance area. Couple other operational changes. Historically, restaurants and certain other on-premise establishments, not including bars, taverns, beer rec licensees, they've been required to show proof that 70% of their sales come from food and not alcohol. Some of you may have heard this called the 70-30 rule, and the legislature made some changes to that this year. Prior to this year, mixers and service charges were prohibited from being included in that 70% calculation. Restaurants and other licensees that are impacted or subject to that 70-30 rule now can include mixers like orange juice, like limes in that food calculation. The legislative changes also give you maybe a little bit of a cheat sheet about what a calculation that we will look for when doing annual audits. And that's up on the screen. We will share that with you as well. But it shows you kind of how that 70-30 will be calculated to better inform your business decisions and records. Again, happy to talk through this with either with your compliance specialist or any of our folks on the call today. Hey. A couple changes related to the department. We are also not immune from changes that impact our operations. The first is that the legislature made some changes to streamline the event permitting process. And one thing I want to point out to you all is that in July, we will actually begin requiring all event permit applications be submitted at least 15 days before the event. Previously, the requirement was that they be submitted 30 days before the event. So this is actually a little less stringent, and our hope is that it will help you because we know last minute things come up. Events can be tricky, but I do want to make sure that it's clear that this will be a hard and fast rule. And so if you don't get it in within that 15-day period, which is really intended to make sure that our small and mighty team has the ability to process it, that we will kind of cut it off. And then last change, the legislature made some changes or clarifications related to what the ABS Commission may consider when reviewing license applications. So many of you, if you are a license holder, you've gone before the ABS Commission and had a license issued to you. It modifies what that group can look at, and specifically location, operational factors, management capabilities, previous violations, and other items that the commission deems relevant. So that covers all the legislative changes. Here is the contacts, and we can share these out with you as well. We've got general questions you can send to our DABS compliance email. You've got Craig War, Christy Talon, and Aaron Hinkle's emails up here. Sorry, guys, you might get a few more emails, but I know they're always happy to help. And then I just want to put a plug again for our website. We're doing our best to update some of the resource and reference guides to available to all of you. There are those reference guides that are applicable to all license types on the website. And then again, all these legislative changes are on our website as well if you'd rather read them instead of go back through this recording. And then I think we may have a little bit of time to go through some of the chat questions. And let's see what we can answer. And just appreciate y'all being here today. Okay. So a couple things. I'll start with, I'll just start from the top. What about out-of-country IDs? I think we talked about that. Foreign driver's licenses are an acceptable form of ID, so you can take that. Passports as well remain acceptable. And then does that include those that have restaurant liquor licenses? We have to have a scanner now. Yeah, the scanner now applies to the dining area and the dispensing area. It just is applicable to those who look under 35. Mobile IDs must be scanned. It's a little different. You have to have the specific technology to take mobile IDs, and we can share out the link about that as well. It's actually managed, that program, through the driver's license division, which is a separate department from us. And, do single event permits and temporary beer permits both require an ID scanner? We do, not specifically in this legislation. There was not any change for that. But as I said, our event permit process generally requires some level of ID checking and not necessarily scanners, but we can walk you through that depending on the type and size of your event. And it looks like there's some concerns with the app working for the driver's license division. That's something we can follow up on and see if we can get more information. But again, they're the ones that really manage that program. Okay. I think we've gotten through most of these. Let me see. Okay, can you talk about escorting a patron to a restaurant more specifically? Is taking them to the host stand at the restaurant acceptable, or does the bar employee need to take them directly to the table they will be seated at? The statute's not specific, so I think that is, again, a business decision. And we can walk through that with your particular restaurant if you want to talk through the specifics. Okay. Lots of questions here. I'm seeing a few requests for the recording. We will share this out so you can review it. And then I think there's a fair amount of questions here that may be actually better answered by just a follow-up email. I've gone through a few of them, but there's enough here that I think a follow-up is probably warranted. I'll answer a few more. And to clarify, for ID checks and scans in restaurant licensees, we do not need to check or scan the IDs of a person who looks over 35 years old, even if they're in the dispensing area, correct? There's no specific scanners that we can endorse. As a State Department, we can't do that. We are happy to talk to you about whether or not the scanner that you choose meets the requirements. The rule as far as keeping information from an electronic scanner for 7 days says specifically that it must be kept for 7 days and then deleted. So it does need to be deleted. Okay. I think we'll follow up with the rest of these, give you a little more robust response. But I also just want to end by saying thank you all for being here. This is kind of one of the first times we've done this as far as with a focus on legislative changes, and I hope it's helpful for you. And it's something we'd like to do on an ongoing basis. Again, reach out if you have any questions. We will follow up, and I just really appreciate you all being here. We know we know it takes a lot to run your operations, to run your businesses, and we're grateful that you do that and largely intend to be safe in doing so. And you really are what makes Utah great and what it is. So thank you all.